right. That brings us to the speaker. I just met Brian here on the Zoom right before the meeting, and interested in learning more about him. All I know is he's been sober since he was 19. So he probably doesn't have a real long drunkalog. I'm just saying, I don't know. I was just getting started when I was 19. But anyway, Brian's going to bring us experience, strength, and hope. Thank you, Brian. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Thank you. I am an alcoholic. My home group is the Thursday night study group in Fort Lauderdale, and my name is Brian. And I'm glad to be here. Yes, I've never taken a legal drink in my life. I got sober at 19. As I said, I've been sober for 36 years, and it's interesting. On the one hand, I destroyed my life. I mean, at the time, there was just no other way to look at it. I had completely, destroyed my life before it ever, at 19 years old, and on the other hand, I got to live a full life in sobriety, and there's not a lot of alcoholics who, get that chance. There are a lot of things that I've been able to see through in sobriety that many people that I love and admire in AA, just simply didn't have the opportunity to. So there's a plus and a minus as well. I don't get to Alcoholics Anonymous only by drinking alcohol, although I'm an alcoholic through and through. I have an allergy and an obsession for alcohol. I got on the accelerated path to Alcoholics Anonymous by being mixed up in other things. But I would tell you that I did not begin to recover from alcoholism until I identified with alcoholism. And that was actually harder than it probably should have been. But I'm pretty thick-headed, and I do not listen well, and I do not take direction, and I did not learn some things that people were clearly trying to teach me early on. And it's so funny how much of recovery is just discovering how I'm in my own way, just all the time, constantly. And so this is a story of somebody who is young and thinks he knows it all, and just gets in his own way over and over and over again. So I will tell you briefly that when I was arrested on February 24th, 1988, the day that I took my last drink, I weighed 125 pounds. I am 6'3" tall. I do not look good at 125 pounds. I'm nearly dead at 125 pounds. And it was the 80s. I think you now have enough information to understand what else was going on with me. And I spent my first year of sobriety in jail and prison. That was probably the dozenth time I'd been arrested in a couple of year period of time. And really just briefly, that couple of years from when I was 17 to when I was 19 just looked like waking up on the cold concrete floor of the Broward County Jail, crystal clear about the fact that it was the drinking that put me there, getting out days or weeks later, and days or weeks after getting out, not being able to hold those two ideas of the first drink and the jail cell floor, not being able to keep those thoughts together, not being able to connect those dots. And I would drink again, and I would end up months later on the cold concrete floor of the Broward County Jail. And I would swear I was never going to touch another drop. I could clearly see how it was the drinking that put me there. And they'd let me out. And a few weeks later, I would end up drinking again. And a few months later, it just over and over. And the only thing that was changing about that scenario for me was that the time in jail was getting longer each time, and the time out of jail was getting shorter each time. And that's the only thing that was changing in 2 years. And finally, on February 24th, 1988, they arrested me that last time, and actually wasn't even telling myself I'm done. I'm not going to take another drink. I actually couldn't even say that to myself at that point. I just couldn't even buy it. I couldn't get myself to believe that that was going to be the case for me. And so what I decided to do was I knew I was going to drink and get high when I got out, and I decided not to come back to South Florida. I got arrested in DeKalb County, Georgia, and I was from, this Fort Lauderdale area, Broward County. I'm originally from Philadelphia, but I moved to Broward County when I was 11 years old. My dad worked for a savings and loan. He was a vice president of a savings and loan. Actually got promoted to a vice president. So we moved from the Philadelphia area to the Fort Lauderdale area. The whole family was going with him. So I figured, being 11, I might as well go too. So that's how I ended up in South Florida. Yeah, you're supposed to laugh at that. Yeah. You can laugh at me though for telling it that way. So my residence was here in Broward County since the time I was 11 years old. But I was in DeKalb County, Georgia for, unsavory reasons. And I got busted and knew that I couldn't stay clean and sober and wasn't really even interested in trying. I wasn't really interested in fighting the temptation of the first drink anymore, to be honest with you. The last couple of times out, I had given in with the idea of, I really want to drink. I know I'm going to end up giving in anyway, so I'm just going to go ahead and do it now. Like I just didn't even have any fight in me. And at 19 years old, that's the state that I was in. I didn't have the horrific physical consequences that a lot of people have from drinking, but I had the horrific physical consequences from the other things that I was doing. I was in terrible physical shape. I mean, just all I could do for the first week I was in jail was eat and sleep. I would wake up when they called chow. I would go and eat. I would come back, take a shower because I would wake up in sweats and must have stunk to high heaven. And I would go back to sleep. I'd wake up the next time they called chow. I mean, I was in terrible. And in jail, where every square on your tray is a commodity to be traded for a cigarette or something, I had people sending me food. Like that's how bad I looked, that people pitied me and were sending me things from their trays that they weren't eating in this jail. And it took a little while to get. I understood where I was. I'd been in jail enough to know that I should take stock of my surroundings and measure things up, and I did that. And there are some certain things about me that I squared away right away, and who not to mess with, and all of that other kind of stuff. I mean, you live that life that you've got to adapt to it. And there was one puzzling feature of this. There's this 20-man dorm that I'm in, and there's 40 men at least in it. And the most puzzling thing about this dorm in this jail was this one guy named Melvin. Melvin was clearly the biggest, toughest guy of the 40. And he was exactly the opposite of what I expected. Melvin was a quiet, mild-mannered, polite, soft-spoken person. And observing him, I noticed a couple of things that are the kinds of things that I usually notice in a person. One is that he read the Bible, and he had little Bible discussions and prayer groups around his bunk with several other inmates or whatever we are at that time. And the reason I notice things like this is I'm not interested in talking to people who are religious at that time. I was raised Catholic. It was not something that ever meant anything to me as I was coming up. I actually today question whether it's even wise to raise kids in a religious environment. I feel like it's a choice that most of us make. I don't know. I have a lot of religious confusion, so I blame that on
What's
that.
so fucking funny, buddy?
I'm sure that's not the case for everybody, though. iPhone, you need to mute your phone. iPhone, mute your phone. And food is also. There you go. I just, so I don't talk to people like Melvin. And here's the thing, I'm not like, I believe in God. I was not anti-religious. I just, that was something that as soon as I was old enough to not go to church with my parents and not be forced to go to church with my parents, I left that behind. And so whatever a 12-year-old boy probably knows about being raised in church is about all that ever meant to me. And it never meant anything to me personally. And I wasn't pro or against. I was ignorant of the subject. And so I would avoid talking to people, obviously, about it, because who wants to talk about things that they're willfully ignorant about? And I was willfully ignorant about religion and Christianity. And so I avoided people like Melvin. To this day, I don't even know how it is that Melvin and I started talking, but Melvin sat me down and told me a story, and I'd never heard a story like this. He told me a story about what his life was like when he was on drugs and alcohol, the miracle that God created in his life, and what his life was like now. And I had never heard a story like that. I'd never heard somebody tell a story that so paralleled my own with respect to drinking and using drugs. And here he is on the other side of that. I mean, he's in jail with me, mind you, but he's in jail for some things that had caught up with him in his past. He had been sober for several years, I think. I really don't remember how long he was sober. It was forever, as far as I was concerned. And and as somebody who'd been struggling for 2 years trying to quit, I was just flabbergasted by this story. He had me. I was just in. And I followed Melvin to church, and the church group sent in a Bible, and I joined Melvin's little prayer and Bible study group, and that was the beginning of my sobriety and my spiritual development. I want to put a pin here, though, because I don't have a lot of those beliefs about God today. That was the beginning, and it was certainly an important part. And I don't believe that I'm sober today if I don't have that experience. I don't know. I mean, there's so much that gets built on when I finally get to AA and get sober that builds on that experience, that I don't see that all happening without that. And I also am, in telling this story, I'm reminded that I was in DeKalb County Jail outside of Atlanta, Georgia, for 6 months. And in 6 months, I had to change jail cells 5 times. Model inmates do not change jail cells. I was just as much trouble in jail, clean and sober, believing in Jesus, as I was outside on drugs and alcohol. Nothing had changed. Now, I was on my way to some new and dramatic changes, but I was a long way away at that point. And I don't believe I would have stayed sober if I had been outside those 6 months. At the end of 6 months, they shackled me up and drugged me back to Fort Lauderdale, where I violated felony probation. About 9 months before going to jail that time, I was arrested right here in Broward County, weighing 127 pounds. Shocker. And I was, put on felony probation, and I had violated that probation, so they extradited me, and I did 6 months on a 2-year prison sentence as a result. I was only supposed to do 3 months on the 2-year prison sentence. I did 6. Model inmates don't do twice as much time as they're supposed to do. I was as much trouble in prison, clean and sober, as I was outside on drugs and alcohol. The only difference is I wasn't killing myself with chemicals and drinking. And it was that treatment center that directed me to Alcoholics Anonymous. I had no intention whatsoever of coming to AA. And I'll tell you why. Because I got a DWI when I was 16 years old. And I don't know what people, hey, there's Roddy. Nice. I don't know what people usually think of when they go to hey, Roddy. I don't know what people usually think of when they go to, Roddy's my friend who actually lives in the, or he's visiting actually in that area of Mississippi where you're at. He's from there too. I don't know what you expect people to think, but when a 16-year-old gets a DWI and goes to an AA meeting, I didn't take very much positive away from that experience. And I made up some stuff about the people that were there, and I never went back. And by the way, later on, when I was actually trying to stay clean and sober, it never even occurred to me to go. It was like whatever happened at the first meeting I went to, first of all, I realized I could have my friends sign the sheet that I was given from the courts and nobody would know the difference. So I didn't need to go back. And number two, whatever it was that happened, I just wrote it off. I just said, you know what? That's for losers. I'm never doing that. And I just, and this is, of course, the main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind, right? This is one of the early ways that I'm getting in my own way, because I wrote off the whole 12-step and AA thing by going to a meeting to try to get my driver's license back from a DWI, having no intention at all of ever stopping drinking. And whatever it was I experienced there, I just wrote the whole thing off. And so when I was in prison and I had this experience so far, I planned on coming out and getting involved in a church and doing a lot of things spiritually to stay sober, but I had no intention of going to AA. And at that treatment center, which I was forced to go to, and I went to kicking and screaming, not literally kicking, but literally screaming at the girl whose job it was to do the intake paperwork for me. I didn't want to be there. I was absolutely irate that I was put in this treatment center, but I surrendered to it and realized eventually that if I really do believe that God's got my back, maybe this is exactly where he wants me to be. And I just sort of melted to the treatment center idea and stuck it out and finished my sentence in treatment. And that was my introduction to Alcoholics Anonymous. I had no intention of coming to AA except for that fact. And the only reason that I'm forced to go to the treatment is because I was in prison for drug-related charges. It's the only reason I was forced to go. So if it wasn't for that fact, I probably wouldn't be here today. I get out, very next day I go to my first AA meeting on the outside. And I went to AA meetings just about every day. I got a sponsor, I got a home group. I did a lot of the things that I was supposed to do, a lot of the things that they suggest that you do. And I met my very first meeting on the outside. I meet a guy who changes my life in sobriety in a way that's probably unexpected. I'll tell you the story in a minute. But at the time, his name is Bruce, and he was all over this AA thing, man. I mean, Bruce was just, I'll just tell you, I walked through, finished my cigarette outside, a half a dozen AAs, none of whom talked to me beyond introducing themselves. They were polite and they introduced themselves, but beyond that, nobody knew who I was from Adam. I walk into the church and Bruce is the only one inside. And this is typical in AA, right? There's at least a half a dozen people there, but there's only one setting up the meeting.
What is this glare on my phone?
So Bruce is inside the meeting, making the coffee and about to set up the tables and chairs. And he looks across the room at me walking in and recognizes me as a newcomer and meets me halfway across the room and introduces himself, finds out by talking to me that I just got out of prison the day before, and this was my first meeting on the outside, gave me a book that somebody had left behind, a 12 and 12, that somebody had left behind because he knew I didn't have any kind of a book, and this was a 12 and 12 that he had that he could give me. And I still have that book today, as a matter of fact. And Bruce was just this giant to me because of that experience. And I couldn't have put a finger on any of that at the time. But as I've gotten sober, I've always reflected back on it. And it's just a remarkable thing that here's this one person out of all these people that this happened with, and made me feel comfortable, and go back. That became my home group. And that was I felt like somebody cared and wanted me there, and I don't know what would have happened if I not met Bruce. And Bruce picked up his 1-year medallion that same month. I was sober for a year, but I picked up a white chip that month. I did not celebrate my first year of sobriety until it was time to either pick up a 4-year or a 5-year chip. And I had a different sponsor by then, and he straightened me out that I should be counting my sobriety. But I didn't. Nobody told me not to count the first year, and I'm not telling anybody else not to count the first year. The year I was in jail and prison, I didn't count it because I was scared to death that if everybody thought I was a year or more sober, I wouldn't get what newcomers in AA got. And I understood. The one thing that I understood is if I drank again, I was going back to jail and prison. I understood that if I drank again, that I was just going back to the life that I had before. I didn't want that under any circumstances. I had tried quitting drinking a dozen times in the last couple of years. Every single time I would get out of jail, and within weeks or days, I would start drinking again. And as far as I was concerned, this was no different. I was scared to death that if I didn't make it in AA, I was just going to repeat the same experience of going back to drinking. And so Bruce picks up his 1-year medallion that year. A whole year goes by. That becomes my home group. I get a sponsor from that group. I get a job. I start doing all the positive things that we do in our first year of sobriety. And Bruce picked up his 2-year medallion the next year, and I picked up my 1-year medallion that year. And a couple months later, Bruce got drunk. And the thing about Bruce is, he was, from the start to the finish, as far as I could tell, he was all over this AA thing. You couldn't go to a meeting in North Broward County without seeing Bruce there. And Bruce wasn't like there in a chair. Bruce got there early to help set up. Bruce was there late cleaning out the coffee pot and the ashtrays. You know what I mean? Like Bruce was just all over this thing. And he would throw my bike in his van. I didn't have a driver's license for several years at AA. He would throw my bike in his van if it was dark or raining and take me home. He wasn't my sponsor, but he was just this monumental figure in my life. And when he got drunk, I lost faith in AA. I didn't know it though. And here's the thing. I spent that first couple of years of sobriety going to discussion meetings with a paradigm of Alcoholics Anonymous that looks sort of like, go to meetings, talk about your problems, help each other stay sober one day at a time. This paradigm is very group therapy kind of focused. And the thing is that I thought that that's what AA was. Now, that's an important thing that we do in AA, right? We go to meetings, we talk about our problems with each other, and we do help each other stay sober. But that's like not AA. Like, that's a part of it, but it's not the ball game, right? It's not the whole thing. And I was going to meetings that fit that paradigm, and I was avoiding meetings that didn't fit that paradigm, more importantly. I thought I had the spiritual part all sewed up because I went to church. And so I didn't pay much attention to the big book. And I had a sponsor, and I was doing steps, but I wasn't doing steps because I understood that I was powerless and that unless I had a spiritual experience, I was going to drink again and die, right? I wasn't doing steps like that. I was doing steps like a child does chores to earn his allowance. That's how I was doing steps. I was doing steps because my sponsor would ask me, "Have you finished with that step yet?" and basically make me do it. Like I wasn't doing it because I understood that if I didn't find some dramatic spiritual experience, I was doomed. I just didn't get it. I didn't understand it. And what it comes down to for me is I didn't understand that I was powerless. Yes, I understood that I couldn't drink and control it. Yes, I understood it was possible that I would drink again and that had always happened to me before when I left. But I really didn't get that I was powerless over alcohol. And I didn't get it until I spent that second year outside of prison in going to AA, basically unwinding a lot of the good that I had done the first year. I can't, and I had no idea that something had dramatically changed. I could not see myself clearly. I did not have enough insight into my thinking and instincts and emotions to recognize that when Bruce drank, my sobriety went off the rails. And where I ended up was not calling my sponsor, not finishing my step work. I went from going to a meeting every day, sometimes twice a day, to going to a couple of meetings a week at just a couple of years of sobriety, a year and a half of sobriety. And I was the first year I was willing to do all the things that were suggested. And the second year, I'm just sort of undoing all of that. Not only that, but to top it off, cherry on the cake, I'm now dating a girl with a week of sobriety, just to give you some clue as to what the hell is going on in here, right? Or a lot of good AAs trying to help. I couldn't see it. I just couldn't see it. And I've been around long enough to see people like me in AA. We do not make it. Most of the time, we do not make it. And here's what happens. This girl that I'm seeing, some idiot in AA convinces her to go to a Joe and Charlie Big Book study, of all things. Now, I didn't bore you with these details, but I got sober at 19. I got out at 20. I'm 21 years old. I don't care about old timers and big book thumpers. Like these are not. This is not AA to me. This is just not what I'm doing. I can't imagine anything I would want to go to less than a big book study with Joe and Charlie. But she was cute, so I was there. I wish that was a better story. It's just what happened. And I'm sitting 20, 30, 40, 50 feet, maybe, I guess 50 feet from Joe and Charlie. And I get there on a Thursday. This is a weekend dedicated to the study of the Big Book and the 12 and 12 in AA history. It's a 4-day event. And I'm there, it started probably at 1 o'clock. I'm there at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And Joe and Charlie are on the stage when I walk into the room. And I'm sitting there trying to figure out what the hell I'm going to do. I go to a big book seminar with Joe and Charlie. I don't have a big book, a 12 and 12, a highlighter, a pen, a piece of paper, nothing, right? The girl that I'm with, she's got a tote bag, big books, 12 and 12s, highlighters, pens. I know it's another fellowship altogether, but she came there ready to learn some things about AA. And who knows, maybe it was all for me. I don't know. But I'm sitting 50 feet away from Joe and Charlie, breaking down the doctor's opinion. Alcoholics have an allergy to the body. When they take a drink of alcohol or two, their body reacts with a physical craving for more. It makes it absolutely impossible for them to control their drinking once they start to drink. And I'm going, oh wow, that's what happens to me when I drink. That's exactly what happens to me when I drink, right? And they said that they also suffer from an obsession of the mind. That an obsession is an idea that overcomes all ideas of the contrary. No matter how bad an alcoholic wants to stay sober, or even needs to stay sober, their mind convinces them it's okay to drink. It's going to be different this time. It's just going to be tonight. Nobody's even going to know, right? As if that was ever true, right? And I'm sitting there listening, and I'm like, holy cow, I'm an alcoholic, and I had no idea. Up until that point in time, I thought I was a crackhead going to AA because the meetings were closer to my home. I had no idea that I was an alcoholic. And all of a sudden, I get this information. So there's two things that happen. Number one, I identify with alcoholism, right? I've been saying my name is Brian, I'm an alcoholic, because I'm respectful when I'm going to AA meetings. I don't think that I'm an alcoholic, though. I think that I'm a drug addict who's going to the only meetings that I can ride a bicycle to, right? I didn't really think of myself as an alcoholic. Well, these guys just, based on what they just explained about what alcoholism is, I'm a real alcoholic. I'm not just I'm an alcoholic first. I'm not even an addict who's an alcoholic. I'm an alcoholic first. I don't have obsessions to go smoke crack. I have obsessions to have a few beers. And once I have a few beers, I cannot control how much I drink, and I tie one on. And once I'm good and lit, there's no telling what I'm gonna do, right? Just Katie bar the door. I'm an alcoholic first. And with this information, I'm thinking to myself, holy cow, this has been going on for a lot longer than I thought it was. I didn't know. I've been an alcoholic at least since I was 16 years old. The only thing that I needed to get a DWI was a driver's license. As soon as I got a driver's license, I got my first DWI. I got my second DWI before I ever got my license back in the first one. I hadn't done any hard drugs yet. I maybe smoked a little pot, maybe a lot of pot, actually. but I was an alcoholic. I'd been drinking since I was 12 years old. I was a full-blown alcoholic by the time I was 16. And all the drugs ended up doing was accelerating me getting to Alcoholics Anonymous, to be honest. And so I'm sitting there and I'm going, holy cow, not only am I an alcoholic, but I understood that I was powerless. I left that weekend with full knowledge of my condition as a powerless person, as somebody. I understand, and they went through not just the problem, but the solution is a spiritual awakening or a spiritual experience, and how the 12 steps are a methodology, a formula for how to have a spiritual experience. I left there crystal clear about the fact that if I did not find people who were doing this 12-step thing and follow them and do what they were doing, I knew I was going to die. I knew I would drink again, and I knew I was going to die. It's the first time I was ever here understanding that I was going to die if I didn't find a spiritual experience. That was step one. That was step one. And until I got that, the rest of this was just impossible. I just couldn't understand it. I couldn't fathom it. And so what happened was everything about my AA life changed. Every meeting that I went to changed. Every person that I talked to changed. I went to big book meetings and step meetings and speaker meetings exclusively, even few speaker meetings, really just step and big book meetings. I had been overdosing on open discussion meetings and the like. My first couple of years, I didn't need any more of those. I was full up. I did enough of those for my whole sobriety. That's not to say that I think open discussion meetings are not bad. As a matter of fact, my home group is a discussion meeting. It's a big book discussion meeting, a topic discussion meeting, but it goes to show you can have a discussion about topics related to AA and recovery from alcoholism. And so it's just that the type of meeting that I was going to was not about AA at all. We were talking about our day. We were pretending to be smart enough to analyze people and tell them what we thought was wrong with them, or it was crazy. It was like group therapy, only without a qualified therapist. Those are the meetings that I was going to before that, and so everything, all of that changes. I went through a couple of phone books that next year or two, because all of the people that I had used to talk to and used to call in AA, all of them changed, over those next couple of years. And I got a sponsor and started working the steps out of the big book. And look, for the next 20 years, I would have told you that the difference between my sobriety before and after that Joe and Charlie Big Book study was that I found a sponsor who understood the big book, and I worked the steps out of the big book. I was at step 10, by the way, when I went to that Joe and Charlie Big Book study. It wasn't like I was doing nothing. Like I said, I just wasn't doing them for the right reasons, and so I wasn't getting the results, right? But the difference wasn't really that I followed the directions in the big book. The difference was that I had never done step one. The real difference didn't have anything to do with the directions my sponsor was using to recover. Although I am a big book thumper, I believe in big book sponsorship, and I am a big book sponsor. That's not the difference. The difference was, before that Joe and Charlie Big Book study, I did not understand that I was powerless, and so I was not participating like my life depended on it. Now I understand that I'm powerless and I'm participating like my life depends on it. That's the difference, right? That was the switch that flipped in my mind and that made recovery a possibility for me. And so I went through the 12 steps out of the big book. I became a big book sponsor. I started sponsoring other people. And today, I don't have a lot of activity in my life surrounding AA. I have a home group. Minimum level of participation is that I have a home group, and my butt is in the chair in that group every single week. And I make myself available to sponsor people. Alcoholics Anonymous asks very little of me in exchange for what I think is a pretty cool life. I do a little service on some other things every now and again. I don't know how many of you are familiar, but there's a technology sharing session that happens in AA. It's where intergroups and general service, people involved in service, share technical solutions to make things easier, to see what other people are doing technology-wise to run their areas and intergroups. And I'm actually chairing that this month. It's a monthly Zoom meeting. So I do a little bit of service with respect to that, but I make myself available to sponsor people. I have learned so much more about myself and about AA through sponsoring other people than I have ever learned just doing the steps, in my own recovery. And it's because when working with another person, I'm always treated to a completely different way of looking at things. And that completely different way of experiencing recovery, when somebody is willing to take something like the 12 steps on them personally and share and be intimate and vulnerable enough to share that experience with me as a participant, I get a window into what recovery looks like from somebody else's point of view. I get a window into how it applies to somebody else. And I can't tell you how many times I've been listening intently in that experience and thought, oh shit, I should work on that. Or something to that effect. Like all of a sudden I see something that I've just never seen about myself before. AA just keeps giving as long as we're participating in the 12-step process. I have grown and see things differently, and so I see myself differently, and I see character defects differently. I see myself doing things that are today unacceptable, where yesterday I wouldn't even have thought it was a problem. And just, that experience, I think, comes from being around people in AA and sharing this experience, especially through sponsorship, but it's not the only way, of course. And it's the thing. The thing is that I get to live a pretty cool life. I mean, I was not on track for the life that I live today when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous by any stretch of the imagination. And this thing, making myself available to sponsor people, and this little bit of service that I do, is the only thing that AA has ever asked of me in return. And it seems to me a pretty good deal for me. It's a pretty small price to pay for a pretty extraordinary life of sobriety that I've had, and the experiences that I've had, and the places that I've traveled to, and the family that I have in my life, and the friends that I've made, and all of the things. I'll be married 20 years this year. What a gift, and she's actually in the living room right now on another Zoom call, playing trivia with our friends. I'm missing that, but what a gift! What a gift Alcoholics Anonymous has given me. 36 years, being sober since 19 years old. Being able to have my mom know that I love her before she passed. That's something that people that I sponsor never got the opportunity to do, some of them, right? But it's a gift that I got. I didn't just get to make amends with her and be on speaking terms. I lived long enough of a relationship with her that she was crystal clear that she didn't make any mistakes with me, that I did this to myself, and that I loved her, and not just because I said so, but because I showed it on a regular basis before she passed. What a gift that is. And so Alcoholics Anonymous is a pretty good deal. I just hope that people will take the time to understand the first step, understand the powerlessness. My life was in the toilet when I got here, and I really didn't know why until I was 3 years sober. 3 years sober. I went to that Joe and Charlie Big Book study. I was in prison, jail and prison for 1, out for 2. And that's when I learned. I could have learned that earlier. We learn when we learn. I guess there's no second guessing that. But what an incredible ride my life has been on ever since then. But it started then. It started the moment I recognized that my life depended on practicing spiritual principles. It doesn't depend on, we have various ideas about what God is. Who and what I think God is has changed dramatically over the years. That's not what it depends on. It depends on staying in the process, which gives us the ability to change our point of view and look at ourselves and life around us from a different angle. And the chances are we're going to be wrong about it all many times over in our sobriety if we're lucky. Right. Thanks for letting me share.